In Milo Novak's medical records, a hairless cat feasts on fear beside a dinner table set for four. Its veins pulse with a sickly, arterial light beneath skin stretched thin over bone. I watch it lick the air, a wet clicking sound like dry twigs snapping, while the monastery library exhales grave dust and wet earth. Stone walls weep moisture, each droplet hitting the floor with a sound like a single heavy heartbeat. My own skin feels cracked, not from age but from the constant, low thrum vibrating through the floorboards. Something older than the monastery, older than the graves outside. The violin case lies open on the table, its lid ajar like a wound. Inside, a single string hangs slack, emitting a raw, discordant note that doesn't harmonize with anything, just hangs there, sharp and wrong. The air tastes of copper and damp stone, the kind of taste that lingers like a memory you can't place. My fingers trace the cold edge of the table, carved with symbols I don't recognize but feel in my bones. The compass on the table spins violently, needle darting like a trapped bird, then stops. It points dead center at the dead bird on the library stone floor. Its wings are rigid, frozen mid-flight, as if the air itself had turned to glass around it. The bird's eyes are glassy, unblinking, staring at nothing. I should feel terror, but it's just a dull ache beneath the fear, a familiar weight like inherited illness settling into my bones. The cat's glowing veins pulse brighter as I look at the bird. It's feeding on the fear I'm not even feeling right now, just the hollow space where it should be. The compass needle jerks, then stops, trembling. It's pointing at the bird, but the needle isn't just pointing. It's moving toward the bird, spinning faster and faster, the metal humming with a sound like a bone grinding against stone. My hand trembles as I reach for the compass. The cat's head lifts, those glowing veins tracing the shape of my face. It doesn't growl, doesn't hiss. It just watches, feeding. The violin's broken string emits a single, raw note that cuts through the silence, a sound that doesn't belong in this place. The compass needle spins violently, then slows. It stops. The needle points directly at the dead bird, then begins to sink, not into the table, but into my palm, the metal cold and sharp against my skin, the needle sinking like a nail driven into flesh. The sound of the violin's broken string echoes, a single discordant note that doesn't end. The cat's veins glow brighter, its head tilted slightly, as if listening to the sound of the needle sinking into my palm. The compass needle sinks deeper, the cold metal pressing into the skin of my palm, the sound of the violin's broken string a raw, discordant note that doesn't harmonize with anything. The needle sinks into my palm, the cold metal pressing into my skin, the sound of the violin's broken string echoing in the silent library. The cat's veins glow brighter, its head tilted slightly, as the needle sinks deeper into my palm. The sound of the violin's broken string echoes, a raw, discordant note that doesn't harmonize with anything. The needle sinks into my palm. The bird's wing lies in my hands, its bones fused to the mortar like a fossil caught mid-scream. I press the blade of my scalpel against the brittle edge of a wing bone, and it cracks under the pressure, the sound like a frozen river breaking in the dead of winter. The mortar crumbles between my fingers, a dry, chalky dust that stings my knuckles. The air reeks of something ancient, like the inside of a tomb that's been sealed for a century and just opened. My hand bleeds onto the wet parchment, the ink blooming like a bruise. The sound of a child crying behind the brick wall grows louder, a wail that doesn't belong to this time or this place. It's a sound that should be muffled, but it isn't. It's raw, unfiltered, and it's coming from somewhere I can't see. The cat's veins flare crimson, a pulse of light that flickers like a dying flame. It watches me, its head tilted, as if it understands what I'm doing. I press harder, the scalpel slicing through the bone, and the sound of cracking ice fills the room, a sound that doesn't belong in a place that's supposed to be silent. The compass on the table spins again, the needle darting like a trapped bird. It points now to a grave beneath the library, a spot I didn't notice before. The violin case lies open, its broken string emitting a sound like ice cracking underfoot. The cat's head lifts, its glowing veins tracing the shape of my face. It doesn't growl, doesn't hiss. It just watches, feeding on the fear I'm not even feeling right now. The compass needle sinks into my palm again, the cold metal pressing into my skin, the sound of the violin's broken string echoing in the silence. The grave stone shifts underfoot, a sound like the earth exhaling, and I feel it in my bones. The cat's veins glow brighter, its head tilted slightly, as if listening to the sound of the needle sinking into my palm. The sound of the violin's broken string echoes, a raw, discordant note that doesn't harmonize with anything. The needle sinks into my palm, the cold metal pressing into my skin, the sound of the violin's broken string a raw, discordant note that doesn't end. The cat's veins glow brighter, its head tilted slightly as the needle sinks deeper into my palm. The sound of the violin's broken string echoes, a raw, discordant note that doesn't harmonize with anything. The needle sinks into my palm. The compass needle trembles against my palm, its brass edge biting into the raw flesh of my wound, like a tooth into rotten meat. The air here is thick with the scent of wet wool and something older, something that clings to the back of the throat. The way the library's bruised, velvet walls ooze a syrup of sky stains, lavender and bruised dark, bleeding down the frescoes in slow, viscous tears. My fingers ache, not from the pressure but from the furrowing, the way the cat's veins pulse in time with the rhythm of my pain, a slow, deliberate throb that syncs with the creak of the swing outside, the one that wasn't there yesterday. The logbook lies open on the table, its pages yellowed at the edges like old teeth, and the ink bleeds in thick, sluggish strokes, spelling out the words I already know: inherited illness, fear of becoming her. The cat's head lifts, its skull too smooth, its veins tracing the shape of my face in flickering crimson, as if it's memorizing the contours of my terror. I don't flinch. I never do. The violin string hums, a sound like a hairline fracture in glass, and then shatter. The note explodes, a jagged scream that rips through the air, sending dust motes spiraling from the shelves. The compass jerks, its needle clawing at the sky-stained wallpaper, leaving behind a trail of fine metallic shavings that glint like fresh blood. The cat's veins flare brighter, casting long, warped shadows across the floor, and I feel the weight of its gaze like a brand. The logbook's ink drips thick and slow, and I don't move. I wait waiter. The drop plops onto my palm, sizzling where the compass cut me open, and the pain is sudden, electric, a white-hot spike that claws up my arm. The cat's head tilts just slightly, as if it's listening to the sound of my blood singing in the air. The broadcast doesn't stop. It never does. The child's cry behind the brick wall grows louder, a raw, unfiltered wail that shouldn't exist in this time, in this place. It's a sound that belongs to the logbook's pages, to the compass's needle, to the cat's veins. I press my fingers against the wound, and the ink seeps deeper, staining my skin like a second heartbeat. The frescoes weep, their sky bleeding into the cracks of the wall, and the cat's glow intensifies, casting me in a crimson light that doesn't reflect. That just preed. The violin's broken string rings on, a dissonant note that never ends, and I know that the broadcast is the only thing keeping me from becoming her. The ink drips again, and this time, it doesn't stop. The violin string snaps, a sound like a brittle bone breaking underfoot. A single note hangs in the air, sour and discordant, echoing off the bruised velvet walls until it is swallowed by the throbbing pulse that beats beneath them all. My heartbeat, or so I thought. But no. The cat's veins flare brighter, casting crimson shadows across the floor that writhe like worms on a hook. They pulsate in time with something else, a rhythm older than mine, deeper than my own thrumming fear. It is not my heart beating beneath us all, it is white hers. The logbook shudders on the table, its pages riffling like skeletal fingers tapping out Morse code from beyond the grave. The ink bleeds faster now, seeping into the wounds of each letter as if their hungry mouths gulping down blood. I watch, hypnotized by the crimson tide creeping across my skin, and I feel it, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against me, like fingertips tracing the lines of my body through the thin fabric of my clothes. The air grows colder, the smell of wet earth and old graves intensifies until it is all I can taste decay on my tongue. The cat arches its back, a low growl rumbling in its throat, a sound like distant thunder, or perhaps that is just the blood rushing in my ears. It turns towards me, its veins tracing patterns reminiscent of tree roots clawing at the ground. The glow casts my hands into stark relief, my knuckles white with tension, my fingers stained red where they clutch the compass. The needle twitches again, this time pointing directly beneath us, not to a corpse buried deep in the monastery's catacombs, but something else entirely. Something closer. My breath catches. It feels like shards of glass slicing through my lungs as I inhale too sharply. The whisper reaches me then. A child's cry from behind the brick wall, raw and unfiltered by time or distance. The shadows in the room seem to coalesce around me, darkening until they're almost solid things. Handprints pressed against my vision that leave behind an echo of cold when I blink them away. My fingers ache with a sudden intense need to touch something real, something tangible, but there is nothing here but dust and decay. The violin string's final note fades into the creak of the swing outside, a sound like old bones stretching before dawn. The cat leaps onto the table, its claws scrabbling against wood as it pads towards me on legs too long for its body. It pauses beside the logbook, head cocked to one side listening. The whispers grow louder now. a cacophony of lost souls clawing at my mind until I want nothing more than silence. To jam wax into my ears and scream until there is no breath left in me, but then she'd win. Her voice would be the only thing echoing through this endless night. I lean over the logbook instead, pressing my palms flat against its pages to steady myself, and that is when I feel them, tiny fingers tracing patterns on mine from beneath the table. The shadows at my feet writhe like snakes as they inch closer, and I realize they're not just hands reaching out for me anymore. They're shooty Arnsu. The cat hisses, a sound like paper tearing, as it lunges towards the darkness pooling around us. Its veins blaze white-hot against its hairless skin, casting everything into harsh relief, each shadowy limb stretching forth from beneath the table, every bone-deep crevice etched into my own trembling hands. And then, the whisper. A single word carried on a breath of decayed leaves and ancient sorrow. Milo. The projector hums to life behind me, a sound like distant thunder rumbling through the earth before an earthquake. Its light flickers across the room, casting everything in stark monochrome, black shadows clawing at white walls, and then it stills. In that moment of silence I hear only my own ragged breath and the faint echo of a name whispered on rotted lips. Milo Novak. The air in the library had thickened, clinging to my skin like a second layer of flesh, slick and unyielding. The compass's needle wasn't just twitching. It was twitty-biting, its edge pressing into the tender skin beneath my jaw, drawing a thin line of heat. I jerked my head away, but the pain didn't come from the compass. It came from deeper, from the way my bones ached like they'd been left out in the sun too long, brittle and aching. The cat watched me from the corner of the room, its veins pulsing in time with something that wasn't a heartbeat, something that fusang sound, a wet, tearing sound, like pages being ripped from a book that had never been written. The piano sat in the center of the room, its frame blackened and warped. The wood split open like a wound. Strings were gone, but not cleanly. They'd been twine-peel dead, their fibers still clinging to the tuning pegs like frayed nerves. The keys were stained, not with dust, but with something darker, something that looked like dried sap but smelled like iron. My fingers hovered over the keys, not daring to touch. The cat's claws scraped against the stone floor, a sound like nails on a chalkboard, and I flinched. The compass burned against my palm. I pressed it to the piano's lid, and the needle screamed. Not in sound, but in the way it vibrated against my skin like a live wire. The wood beneath my fingers was cold, but not the cold of marble. It was the cold of a grave, the kind that seeps into your bones and never leaves. The cat's veins flared brighter, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers reaching for me. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. The air tasted of rust and something older, something that had been buried before time was even a word. The piano's lid creaked open on its own, the sound like a door hinges in a windstorm. Inside, the inner workings were exposed. Not the clean, polished gears of a normal instrument, but something organic, something that looked like it had been grown, not built. Strings of muscle and sinew coiled around the hammers, pulsing weakly, as if waiting. The cat's growl rumbled through the room, low and wet, like a storm gathering over a swamp. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The compass's needle pressed harder into my skin, and I felt it, the fuzzy-like gravity bending in the wrong direction. My fear wasn't mine anymore. It was Fidhirsind. The loom began to weave, not the piano, not the strings, the void air itself. It shimmered, like heat rising from pavement, but wrong, too slow, too deliberate. The cat's veins pulsed in time with emotion, casting jagged light across the walls. The shadows stretched, twisting into shapes that weren't shadows at all, but 20-hand Sid, reaching for me from the corners of the room. My breath came in shallow gasps, each one burning like I'd inhaled embers. The compass's needle dug deeper, and I tasted blood copper, thick and metallic, filling my mouth. The loom wove my fear into a shroud, thick and suffocating. And I knew if I didn't move, if I didn't fight it, I'd be trapped inside it, forever. The cat lunged, not at me, at the loom. Its claws raked across the air, and the threads screamed, a sound like wet parchment tearing, like flesh being pulled from bone. The piano's lid slammed shut, but the damage was done. The shroud clung to me, heavy and cold, and I could feel it went breathing. The cat's veins dimmed, its body trembling with the effort. It turned to me, its eyes wide and wild, and I saw it then, the truth in its gaze. It wasn't protecting me. It was sweet warning me. The loom had already started. The library's silence was shattered by a creak, rhythmic and insistent, a playground swing swaying in an unseen breeze. It groaned through the air, a metallic rasp that tasted of rust on my tongue. I swallowed hard, feeling the compass burn against my palm like a brandsman's iron. My mother's logbook lay open before me, its pages yellowed with age and something else. Something darker, something that looked like dried blood but wasn't quite. The air was thick with it, heavy as grave dirt. It tasted of copper, coating the back of my throat until I could barely breathe. Her hands trembled when she wrote this. I thought tracing the spidery script, just like mine are trembling now. The compass needle twitched, quivered, then screamed toward me, toward my own throat. It was a soundless scream, but it echoed in my bones nonetheless, resonating with that low-frequency pulse that seemed to throb through the very walls of this godforsaken monastery. The violin began its groaning again, one string protesting like a playground swing pushed too high, creaking, wailing, threatening to snap. It was a sound that made my skin crawl and my teeth ache, a noise that shouldn't exist in nature but did here in this underground city of madness. I read on 20 and her hands trembled like this when she died, the logbook said. My own hands clenched around it, knuckles white as bone, veins standing out like rivers carved into marble. The air grew colder still, seeping into my bones until I felt like I'd been buried alive alongside her. The cat watched me from its corner, veins pulsing in time with the heartbeat. The low-frequency pulse that seemed to sync up with everything here. The swings creak, the violins groan, even my own ragged breathing. Its eyes were wide and wild, reflecting nothing but shadows, no deep purple light this time. The logbook dissolved into my hands, or maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me again. But either way, I felt its words sinking beneath my skin like needles pricking flesh. Finn, you'll be next. They seemed to whisper. Her illness is inherited. A drop of blood fell onto the stone floor, a red stain spreading against the cold gray like a bruise forming under skin. It was mine, I hadn't even noticed when it happened. Too lost in thought and dread. The compass needle dug deeper into my palm now, drawing more blood. Her blood? Mine? Who could tell anymore? I wiped my hand on my trousers but couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The cat's veins were no longer pulsing, they'd gone still as death itself. And then I heard it, that childlike crying behind a solid brick wall, louder than ever before. The loom started weaving again, threads of fear spinning into shape in mid-air, hands reaching for me from the corners of the room once more. But this time they weren't just hands. They were silvery hair hands, trembling, bony, coated with blood that wasn't mine anymore but was somehow very much my own. The cat lunged at them, a blur of fur and teeth, and then it happened, everything stopped. No creaking swing, no groaning violin string, not even the low-frequency pulse throbbing through everything else. Just silence. And in that silence I felt something break inside me, something vital and irreparable. Like a glass shattering into pieces too small to ever be glued back together again. The projector hums like a dying insect trapped in amber, its lens flickering with static that tastes like burnt sugar on my tongue. I lunge for it, fingers closing around the warm metal, but the compass bites deeper, its needle a jagged shard pressing into my palm, drawing a fresh line of blood. The air thickens, not with the scent of copper this time, but with something thicker, something like the grease of a rusted hinge, or the sour tang of spoiled milk left too long in the sun. My breath comes in ragged bursts, each one sending a shudder through my ribs. The violin starts before I even touch the switch, a single note, not through the wall but to and from. It brick groaning as if the mortar were made of living muscle. The sound isn't just heard, it's Winfelty, vibrating up through my bones, settling in my teeth like a dentist's drill. The cat's veins flare, a sickly greenish yellow pulsing in time with the music, but this time it doesn't lunge, it watches. Its eyes no purple glow now, just hollow pits stare at the wall as if daring it to break. I slam my fist against the projector's side. The metal screams, a high-pitched wail that cuts through the violin's keening. The broadcast flickers, but the needle in the compass doesn't budge. It laughs her. If a compass could laugh a dry, clicking sound like a typewriter misfiring. The wall ahead of me soon breathes. Not metaphorically, the bricks shift, ever so slightly, as if inhaling. A crack splits the surface, not straight but jagged, like a wound that won't heal. From it seeps a sound, wet, ragged breathing. The kind of noise a drowning man makes when he's too far gone to choke. The violin's note deepens, dropping into a minor key that doesn't exist. It's the sound of a child's laughter, but wrong, stretched too thin, like taffy pulled until it snaps. The cat's tail twitches, once, then stills. Its light dims, not fading, but fully consuming itself. Like a candle guttering out in a hurricane. The wall Fwyn PLC. Not like wallpaper coming loose, but like skin sloughing off a burn victim. Flakes of brick curling away in slow motion. Beneath it isn't plaster or wood or any damn thing normal. It's signed hair, my mother's face, or what's left of it. Her mouth is sewn shut with something dark and glistening, her eyes two empty sockets weeping black fluid. The stitches pulse in time with the violin, each one splitting open just enough to let out a whisper. "You'll sing next." The compass needle twitches toward my throat, not my palm this time. The blood on my hand steams, bubbles forming where it touches the air, and the wall's breath becomes a scream. The corpse was cold, not the clean, clinical chill of refrigerated meat, but a deep, marrow-deep cold that seemed to leach the warmth from my own bones. I pressed the compass against its chest, the needle quivering, then settling with a sickening finality. It adhered to the skin with a faint, sucking sound, the brass cold against the decaying flesh. The metal bit into my palm, a familiar throb that was almost welcome compared to the humming dread that pulsed beneath my skin. The cat, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised sky filtering through the library's grimy windows, began to feed. Not on the flesh, not directly, but on the fear that clung to the corpse, a viscous, palpable thing. Its veins stark against its hairless hide, flared with an unholy light, a sickly chartreuse that pulsed in time with the violin's fractured lament. It was a sound that shouldn't be possible, a single, strained string vibrating with a mournful resonance that seemed to emanate from the very stone of the monastery. It wasn't a melody, not really, more like a prolonged, agonizing sigh. The compass needle, previously fixed, began to spin, a frantic, dizzying whirl that threatened to pull me off balance. It felt less like a direction now, more like a frantic heartbeat trapped within the brass casing. A coldness bloomed in my chest, mirroring the chill of the corpse beneath my hand. I tasted something acrid on my tongue, a phantom bitterness that had nothing to do with hunger. It was the taste of wrongness, of something fundamentally broken. A wave of nausea rolled over me, the smell of wet earth and old graves ever present in this subterranean tomb, intensified, choking me. I braced myself against the cold stone floor, the rough texture scraping against my palms. The air thickened, a suffocating weight pressing against my lungs. It tasted of dust and something else, something indefinable, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The violin's dirge warped, the single string seeming to buckle under the strain of its own sorrow. It wasn't a sound anymore, but a physical force, a vibration that rattled my teeth and made my vision swim. The compass needle, still spinning, pressed deeper into my chest, a searing pain that eclipsed the constant throb of the inherited madness. I gasped, a strangled sound lost in the violin's keening. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, a throbbing ache that threatened to split my skull. The world swam, the shadows in the corners of the library deepening, coalescing into shapes I couldn't quite define. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to fundy stop, the relentless agonizing sound. But I was frozen, trapped, a puppet dancing to a tune played by something ancient and cruel. The needle stopped spinning. It didn't point north. It didn't point south. It pointed directly at my heart. A tremor ran through me, a violent shudder that ripped through my muscles. The pain intensified, a burning sensation that spread from my sternum to my fingertips. The cat hissed, a rasping sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, then retreated into the shadows, its unearthly light dimming. I watched, helpless, as the needle sank not slowly, not gradually. It plunged in, a silver shard piercing flesh and bone. A wave of icy cold washed over me, extinguishing the fire in my veins. The violin's song faded, leaving behind a ringing silence that was somehow more terrifying than the music itself. The world tilted, the library's shelves blurring into a swirling vortex of dust and decay. Then, darkness. The bruised sky seeps through the library's grimy windows, casting an indigo stain on the worn stone floor. It creeps up the walls, a slow, insidious tide that leaves behind a sheen like wet ink. I watch my shadow stretch and warp as the light wanes, its edges dissolving into the encroaching darkness. The cat sits atop an ancient tome, its hairless body blending with a worn leather spine until only those pulsating veins give it away. They throb with an unholy light, casting sickly shadows that dance macabre jigs across the decaying pages. Its eyes are pits of endless night, reflecting nothing, seeing everything. The violin sound has become something else now, a living thing that breathes and pulses in time with my heart. It seeps into the bones of the wall, each note resonating like a struck tuning fork, vibrating through flesh and stone alike, until it feels as if I'm standing inside an enormous bell being rung by some unseen giant hand. My shadow stretches further, tendrils reaching out towards the cat, towards the pulsating veins that seem to call to me. They throb in time with the violin's dirge, a symphony of fear and madness played on strings, slicked with blood and sorrow. The compass needle spins wildly before suddenly arresting its frantic dance. It doesn't point north or south now. It points inward directly at my heart. A cold sweat breaks out across my brow as I stare down at the brass case, feeling a tremor run through me like a shockwave. The pain in my chest intensifies, a burning sensation that spreads from sternum to fingertips until I'm convinced flames will lick forth from beneath my skin. The cat hisses, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, and retreats into the shadows behind it. Its light dims but doesn't fade entirely. Instead, it seems to pool around me, coalescing at my feet before beginning its slow ascent up my body. I watch in horror as my shadow dissolves completely into the bruised sky, leaving nothing but empty wall illuminated by that sickly chartreuse glow. Then darkness claims me once more, and with it comes a sound unlike any other, not music or madness, but silence itself screaming. I place my palm flat on the compass. Brass is cold as a coffin nail, slick with the same sweat that beads across my brow. The needle doesn't spin. It drowns as sinking into the brass casing like a stone in stagnant water. My heart hammers against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. The violin's broken string gives one last note, a dry leaf snapping underfoot, sharp and final. The monastery library breathes wet earth and old graves into my lungs. Stone walls exhale the damp chill of forgotten tombs. The cat's veins fade from sickly chartreuse to a dull, fading emerald, then vanish entirely. Its eyes, pits of endless night, lose their glow. It vanishes into the shadows behind the bookshelf, leaving only the ghost of its presence. The air tastes like a fresh wound, coppery, blood-slicked. I stare down at the compass. It points inward, not north, not south, but 20 down T, directly at my own heart. At my own corpse. The pain in my chest intensifies, a cold fire spreading from sternum to fingertips, making my skin feel tight and thin as old vellum. I watch my shadow, already dissolved into the bruised sky, recede further. It dissolves into the indigo stain on the stone floor, bleeding into the wet darkness like ink in water. The cat's absence leaves a hollow space, but it's not empty. It's filled with the sound of my own breath, ragged and thin. The compass needle vibrates, not with the pulse of the earth, but with the rhythm of my own dying heart. Thump, thump. A dry, clicking sound like a bone settling in a grave. The violin's broken string echoes this sound, a wet cough of finality. I feel the cold brass beneath my palm, the vibration traveling up my arm, a toothache in the bones. The library walls seem to pulse, breathing the same rhythm. Wet stone weeps. The bruised sky above the windows deepens, the indigo bleeding into a true swallowing black. I feel my shadow dissolve completely, no longer a shape against the wall, just empty space where I stand, illuminated by the sickly chartreuse glow that's now pooling at my feet, rising slowly, silently. The air tastes of copper, sharp and metallic, coating my tongue. I watch the last vestiges of my shadow vanish into the indigo stain on the floor. It doesn't fade, it unravels, like frayed thread dissolving into the wet darkness of the stone. The library breathes wet earth, old graves. The final note of the violin is gone. Only the silence remains, a silence that screams. And then the shadow is gone. Only the bruised sky remains, and the sound of my own breathing, ragged and thin, the only sound left in the world.